In the years that I toured with Frank Sinatra, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. I turned down more opportunities because I knew this was the end of an era.
Yeah, that level and manipulation is not the right word, I don't think completely, but that level of control that you have to have. And I didn't even think about that. The fact that you're coming out as a downer because they think it's Sinatra. You know what I mean? And like you said, they're not coming to see you. So you're already down, you're already a step down right when you come out. Okay. That's first of all, that's gonna be super difficult, no matter I don't care who you talk to, that's gonna be super difficult. Okay, so now you toured with him for 14 years. What years were those? When did you start? When did you end? What year?
1982 to 1996.
Okay, so Frank Sinatra, you stopped touring with Frank Sinatra, and you were there for his last show, I believe, right?
Yeah, I was there when he sang the very last song, and that was "The Best Is Yet to Come."
Right. What was that night like? I mean, was it pretty heavy? You kind of just, I mean, in the book, you kind of talk about a little bit of his decline, towards the
Yeah.
last little end of his career there. Um, and that night, you could feel it. It's heavy. You realize it's the end of this
No, no,
crazy career.
no, Steve, I have to interrupt. He hadn't sung for 4 months,
Oh,
so we
okay.
didn't know if he was ever going to sing again because he wasn't in great health, and so no one knew was he going to sing again. And
Right.
that night was the Barbara Sinatra. It was a Frank Sinatra Celebrity Invitational golf tournament. It was a black tie affair.
Hmm.
The closing of the a couple of days of golf and raising money for the charity, and it was for the Barbara Sinatra Children's Center. So
Hmm.
I was to do like 20 minutes of comedy. He was going to do 3 songs, and he hadn't
Hmm.
sung in 4 months. So the conductor, Frank Jr., his son, didn't bring a lot of sheet music. He brought 6 songs because
Hmm.
Frank was only going to sing 3. So all of us were concerned as he walked out. The crowd went wild.
Right.
He sang his first song. He got a standing ovation. He sang the second song. He got a standing ovation. He sang the third song. They couldn't get enough of him.
Hmm.
And so now he ends up singing 6 songs. And the only reason he didn't do any more, they ran out of sheet music. You know,
Really.
so he comes off stage and he looks at me. He said, "Don't put away that suitcase." So I thought, "Oh boy, we're going on the road again." But we didn't. He started getting ill and more ill. You know,
Hmm.
but that was that was it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it was kind of, here we are after Frank Sinatra. What do you think, from 96 until today, what do you think have been some of the bigger things that you've done so far? I mean, because you could have easily stopped there, right? If you didn't have the love for stand up, if it was purely a job. I mean, I don't know your situation, obviously, but I think you could have probably just carried on from there and just, you've done so much already. What are some of the things you've done since then?
I love stand up comedy. I love it. Years ago I was working at Harrah's, and George Burns was at Caesars in Lake Tahoe,
Hmm.
and I had done the Dean Martin roast. I roasted George Burns on the Dean Martin roast, and I liked him a lot. And so I rushed over to see his show, and he was 95 years old. He
Hmm.
didn't run out to the microphone, but when he got out there, he did a strong hour and 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
afterward, I went backstage and to see him, and he was in the dressing room. He had some 3x5 cards, and he was looking at these cards. And I said, "Hey, George, how you doing?" He goes, "Oh, hi, Tommy." He said, "I was working on some new material tonight." And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be 95 years old working on new material.
Hmm.
So when Frank
Yeah.
passed away, there was a big vacuum in my life. I mean, here I'm flying in private jets all over the world. Now I'm over in line at Piedmont. You guys got anything in coach?
Yeah.
I mean, I fly first class all the time. That's part of my contracts. But my point is that it was a really a culture shock in children's, But I love stand up so much that I just kept working and doing corporate dates and and
Hmm.
headlining myself in different places, And but the interesting thing was, no matter where I went, no matter what I did, they wanted to talk about Frank Sinatra.
Hmm.
David Letterman, my buddy,
Hmm.
I did 50 David Letterman shows. Every time I went on the show, he wanted to know a Frank Sinatra story.
Hmm.
I found that it was one time when I was on the jet with Frank, we were landing in Palm Springs. He kept his jet here in Sherman Oaks, where I live, in Van Nuys, but I live
Hmm.
in Sherman Oaks. So I would get on the jet and sometimes fly down there, or
Hmm.
I'd stay at his home and we'd fly out of there. But when he'd get on the jet there, we take off from there.
Right.
But anyhow, I forgot where I was going with this story. Uh,
Yeah, everybody's talking about, yeah.
I was saying one time I landed with Frank, forgive me. One time we landed in Palm Springs and the jet was coming back here. And he said to me, Tommy, you're going to spend the weekend. It was on a Thursday. I said, no, I got to go in to do the Tonight Show on Friday. He said, I'll call Freddie DeCorva. I'll get you out of it. I said, no, I don't want to get out of it. It was my 50th appearance on the show, and we're making a big deal out of it. So he said, yeah, wow, 50 appearances on the Tonight Show. He said, that's quite a bit. That must be a record. I said, no, there's a couple other comedians, David Brenner, I think Rodney, maybe Robert Klein. I don't know, maybe he did more than me, but it doesn't matter, Frank. I said, no matter what I do the rest of my life, I could find the cure to cancer. People are going to say to me, my obituary is going to say that the comedian who opened for Frank Sinatra, no matter what I accomplish. He said, well, maybe my obituary would say the singer who worked with Tom Dreesen, and we both started laughing like two high school sophomores. But it's come to pass. That's always happened to me. So after Frank, after Frank goes away, I was running a marathon one time in CNN. It was for multiple sclerosis, and because my sister had MS, and CNN cameras were out there, and they said, we're out here with Tom Dreesen. He's about ready to start, ready to fire the gun, run his first marathon. Tom, tell us about Frank Sinatra. And he puts a microphone in front of me. So they all want to know. So now that's when I wrote this one-man show. I kept my whole career, I tell young comedians, journal. Everything that happens to you at nighttime, go before you go to bed, journal. What happened that day? If something poignant happened that day, or something very funny, or something tragic, but journal. And I did that. And so now I had enough material that I could do a one-man show. And so I do the one. I used to call it an evening of laughter and memories of Sinatra. But a lot of people thought, oh, are you going to sing? So now I call it the man who made Sinatra laugh. And it's what I told you about earlier. So that kept me busy. Plus, doing corporate dates kept me busy. Plus, I'm a motivational speaker that I told you about. That kept me busy. In the meantime, I wrote a book that you talked about earlier, Still Standing. So I kept myself busy. And I love golf, and I'm playing a lot of golf, and I'm enjoying life.
For sure. And I think you talked a lot about the relationship you had with Frank Sinatra. Obviously, me and you have talked about, or you and I have talked in length about, now it's private jets and now it's this, and kind of your perspective. In your book, you talk a lot about what Frank Sinatra was like. He was extremely generous, you mentioned. You talked about, he would just not only throw money, but just his time and blah, blah, blah. First of all, what do you think are your biggest takeaways from that relationship with that actual individual person, Frank Sinatra? You know what I mean? How did he influence you the most, do you think?
I had never been around anybody that's a living legend. People throw that word around.
Yeah.
But this was a living legend. This was a man who not only he transcended show business, not only was he the greatest pop singer of all time, without a doubt, the greatest pop singer of all time, went to the studio 1,431 times, recorded over 100 albums, was on the Billboard charts from the 1940s till the day he died, 3 Oscars, Grammys, and he won the Academy Award for acting in the movie From Here to Eternity. One night sitting with Gregory Peck, Jack Lemmon, with Clint Eastwood, with Robert Redford. I mean, not Robert. With Kirk Douglas and Robert Wagner. And back at Frank Shower, they were all sitting around talking. They were talking film and showbiz. And I was fascinated, just listening like a fly on the wall. But they were showing such great reverence to Frank. And I said to him, I was just curious. I said, did you study acting? Because out in Hollywood, they say, I studied with Stella Adler. I studied with Lee Strasberg. I was curious who he studied with. I said, you study acting? And Gregory Peck grabbed my arm and said, acting lessons would have ruined him. He was a diamond in the rough. You didn't fool with. That I took away that this learned actor, Gregory Peck, said acting lessons would have ruined him. When you gave Frank Sinatra a song, to him it was a script. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? He immersed himself in that lyric and became that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him and he's never going to find love again. It was an amazing thing to watch him. Charlton Heston once said, to watch Frank Sinatra sing a song is watching a 4-minute movie. Because you felt that. Steve Lawrence, one of the great singers of our time, said to Frank one night when I was with him, he said to Frank, you ruined it for all the rest of us.
Right.
Because once they heard you sing, They knew how that song was supposed to be sung. So I took away all of that, this guy larger than life. And how many people do you know are stars 10 years, 20 years, maybe
Right.
25 years?
Sure.
Who's a star for 60 years?
Right.
Who's a star? What singer do you know sang English in Brazil and sold 175,000 seats? One singer. I know you can tell me rock groups.
Wow.
One man.
Mm-hmm.
He sold out in Japan when he was 78 years old.
Wow.
We're talking about a phenom here. We're talking about, he danced with Gene Kelly in the movies.
Right.
He danced with Gene Kelly. This wasn't your ordinary star.
Mm-hmm.
This was a living legend.
Right.
And on top of all that, I could talk about Frank Sinatra for an hour and a half of all of his attributes.
Sure.
And at the end, I'll say, any questions? And one person will raise their hand and say, was Frank Sinatra in the mafia?
Right.
That mystique. Did he know those guys? Of course he knew those guys. We all knew those guys because they owned, when I started out, like when Frank started way before me, they owned the nightclubs. They owned Las Vegas. They owned the recording companies. They owned the jukeboxes. They were syndicate owned other. So they were so heavily involved in the business. Dumb question. Do you know them? Of course everybody knew them.
For sure.
Were you one of them? That's another story. So I took away that I have to tell you something else, Steve. In the years that I toured with Frank Sinatra, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. I turned down more opportunities because I knew this was the end of an era, and I wanted to be there.
For sure.
As long as he wanted me, I wanted to be there. There were guys back home, Steve, that I did 60 Tonight Show. I did all those things. Hey, Tommy, how's show business? But when I started touring with Frank Sinatra, those same guys, hey, you believe it? Tommy's with Frank Sinatra.
Right.
All of a sudden, all those other shows meant nothing, to the. I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia. I got a doctorate from the streets. And my guys back home, it was a whole new ball game when you toured with Frank. Anyhow, that was kind of another long answer to a short question.
If you enjoyed this content, be sure to check out the Standing Still podcast, both here on YouTube and wherever else you listen to podcasts.